Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of A Playmakers View. If you're new to the channel, thank you so much for stopping by. And if you're returning, welcome back. It's been a while since I sat down with a guest and did a full podcast, but an opportunity presented itself and I could not turn it down. In this episode, I'm joined by the founder and CEO of Holistic Athlete, Zack Etter. I am so thrilled for this opportunity to talk with Zack and have him share his story and message. So without further ado, let's jump right in. All right, so to get started, Zack, first off, thank you so much for joining. I know it took a little bit of time for us to get this going. I know you're a busy guy, but I do appreciate you joining the show. So to get started, I usually just ask my guests to introduce themselves. So without further ado, can you give us a brief introduction?
Sure thing. My name's Zack Etter. I'm a licensed professional counselor, a clinical mental health therapist in New England, and I'm also a certified mental performance coach. So I work with teams and athletes on improving their mental skills to help them perform better and also to help them with any off-field issues that they might be dealing with, whether that's depression, anxiety, other mood disorders, relationship issues, substance use issues. And it's really a growing field in the sense of, I think after COVID, a lot of people understand the importance of not just the mental aspect of performance, but the fact that if an athlete's mental health is not taken care of, if they're struggling with issues off the field, it's going to impact who they are on the field and in the locker room and in the organization that they play for. So I actually, this is going to be news to you. I actually just accepted a job working as a mental health and performance clinician for the University of Massachusetts in their athletic department that I'm going to be starting there in a couple weeks.
Awesome. That's super exciting. Yeah, that's news to me. But I actually wanted to ask you a little bit about that. I know you have some background working with professional teams. I think it was the Cowboys. So can you walk me through what you did with those teams exactly? The day in and day out of that job, maybe?
Yeah, so the Dallas Cowboys host youth development camps and high school camps throughout the summer. So I got an opportunity to work with coaches and players on staff in Dallas with their development programs. This was in the summer of 2017. So, it was the summer following the rookie season of Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott. So, the players were there and helping me kind of run this youth development camp. So the work that I did with the Cowboys was more of working for the organization for their camps, not necessarily directly with the players and coaches there. But the work that I've done directly with athletes is more at the college level. Springfield College, I worked with their football team, baseball team, soccer, track and field, lacrosse, wrestling. Of course, going to be working with UMass athletic department here. And I've worked with a lot of high school teams as well, and in individual athletes at the pro, college, and high school level. I actually have my youngest client right now for Holistic Athlete, which is my mental performance consulting company. The youngest athlete that I have is 11, and the oldest is playing professional lacrosse right now.
Awesome. That's amazing. I want to dive into your company or your organization in a little bit, but before we get into that, I want to ask you a little bit about your experience from the sports side. So we'll talk a little bit about your approach, like the mental side of everything. But growing up, what kind of impact did sports have in your life, and why do you have so much passion for it?
So it was great to be able to go down to Dallas for that summer because growing up, my godfather was a huge Dallas Cowboys fan, and so was my brother. So I just kind of fell in love with football. I played high school football, I coached high school football, and I was taking the professional track of coaching college football prior to pursuing sports psychology. I coached at the University of Connecticut, Fordham University, the University of Delaware, and I was really kind of lacking the relationship aspect of it. I loved coaching and I loved, going to the office every day and the X's and O's of trying to figure out how to game plan and win at that level. But I wasn't able, we didn't have the time to make the kind of impact from a relationship standpoint that I wanted on those student athletes. And I felt like pursuing sports psychology was a way to stay in the sports lane and fulfill my love of sports and competitiveness while also, making the kind of impact that'll last well beyond the athlete's years of playing sports.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think people take for granted more than just the game. There's a lot more to the game. Whether it's from the coaching side or from the player side, or even the family and the fans. I mean, there's so much that goes into it. So, can you tell me a little bit about how things got started? So, Holistic Athlete is your organization, CEO and founder of Holistic Athlete. So, first off, what is it? And can you walk me through your journey to I know you have a blog. I know you've written a book. So how did this? When did this get started, and like how did it develop?
So holistic athlete, I started during 2020. I think
As we
there
all.
was a pressing need for it. There was no sports. I'm up in New England, so there was no sports being played at the time. And I knew that coming back to play whenever, the kids were allowed to come back to play, that there would be a huge need because it's a bunch of people coming together with different experiences, different backgrounds, and different homes that have been affected by, the pandemic in different ways. And I knew that coaches as well had time on their hands. They wanted to be getting better. They wanted the professional development and figure out a chance to have a competitive advantage. That's how coaches are wired, but they're not on the field. So I wanted to give them, resources and workshops and a coach's education course to kind of help their development throughout the pandemic. And the way that I started Holistic Athlete, it was, if I knew that it was going to turn into this, I would definitely do it again, but it was a lot of work. The first thing that I did is I sent out a mass email and tweet and Instagram posts, and I offered one free workshop to any team that wanted it
Mm,
across all sports, like any level of sports. And I ended up doing maybe like 250 free workshops, which of
wow.
course that turned into business afterwards. But Holistic Athlete is a mental performance consulting company in one division and a private practice in another. So what that means is on one division, the consulting one, we have products and services that help athletes play better. So it's workshops on mental skills like confidence, emotional regulation, resilience, performing under pressure. I do those in-person workshops or virtually, or there's also recorded options, for workshops. I do one-on-one counseling sessions with coaches and athletes, and I have an online coaches education course that I've sold as well. And
Mm,
then the private practice division is the mental health therapy aspect of it, where athletes who have insurance can get that covered as part of their medical insurance, where similar to how insurance might cover a mental health therapy session, where you need to be licensed to work in the private practice division of Holistic Athlete, where we have a caseload of athletes who are working on more of a clinical diagnosis like anxiety or depression or anything else that might be in the DSM-5, which is the diagnostic manual for mental health.
gotcha. So is this just you doing this, or do you have a team behind this? I would assume you have some sort of team that works with you to help these athletes.
So I have people who work as independent contractors, kind of depending on the project that we're working on.
Mm,
So when I was out in Lake Tahoe, California, we were administering and implementing some mental skills training camps for these elite soccer programs out in the valley in
right.
California. And I had a team of 7 or 8 people that I hired to come do that with me. That's where I wrote the book, My Mental Playbook, and we used that as the curriculum for the book. And then we were giving workshops and sessions to those kids. So it really depends on where we're at and kind of what the caseload is and what the demand is. I have 5 to 7 people that I'll call and bring into a project or a job that we're doing. In terms of the private practice division, we opened that on July 12th. And so that's brand new. Like the kind of being able to bill insurance. So that's a new feature of the company that we're still kind of working through what those contracts would look like and how I would hire people. But we're going to continue to build both branches. I just need to figure out working with UMass, what that's going to look like moving forward.
Gotcha. So I do want to go back and ask a little bit more about the side of getting it developed. Um, what kind of struggles did you go through? Obviously, you sent out that stuff and you had gave hundreds of free like consultations. So there's grit and grind to developing something like this. So can you walk us through that process and how you maybe even for your own mental health, how you overcame some of that stuff?
Yeah, I think that there's a natural resistance and stigma that surrounds mental health, particularly in sports. I think athletes, statistically speaking, are less likely to seek help than the general population, and they're actually more likely to struggle with a mental health diagnosis than the general population. So that's a pretty tough give and take. And what I really just focused on was, instead of trying to sell the vision of the company and to sell products, I really just tried to raise awareness of the growing mental health issue that's taking place in athletics. So I would, talk about limiting beliefs that a lot of athletes have that are holding them back for performing well, or, talk about what does anxiety look like, and, what are different ways to approach it or tackle it. And I try to do so in a way that's non-threatening. One of my favorite quotes ever is from Nick Saban. He says, "You don't need to be sick to get better." Right. And I think the mindset that I want athletes to have, and that any coach would want their athlete to have, is to take advantage of any opportunity they have to improve. So working on your mental health and working on your mental performance is the same as going to the gym. It's the same as, working your skills with the coaches on the field. It's just another facet of your life and performance that you have the opportunity to improve. So I think to deal mentally, on my end, to deal with the resistance and to deal with the stigma, another logistical issue is that a lot of athletic departments, in 2020, when I was getting started, don't have funding for this. There's no
Right.
positions, that they have set stipends for, set salaries for. So I kind of had to create positions and create opportunities by raising awareness. So I think the idea of just presenting this as an idea and more of an opportunity to learn something that you could implement in your life that could help, as opposed to trying to sell, that was my biggest, I guess, I that was my biggest approach that helped, because if I was just coming in as a consultant and trying to sell products about mental health, that kind of looks weird and that looks uncomfortable and there's no money for it. But once I
Mhm.
was able to get in the door and do the live consultations and, do the free workshops, I think people really understood that this kind of information can be valuable, that these skills can help them perform better, and that these are not just sport performance skills. When we talk about confidence and emotional regulation and performing under pressure and communication and leadership, these are things that are going to help these athletes in the classroom, in their social lives, in their personal lives, when they, get a job. So these are life skills that we're teaching. And I think that's the message that I send, that we're doing these life skills on the field to help perform better, but it's also going to make you a better person overall.
Definitely. And, not to say that obviously sports and mental health is a big thing. And I want to mention too, I mean, even if you're not involved in sports, mental health can be a pretty big thing. And that's why I think it's super important to tackle this issue. And with one of my not main questions, but one of the questions I wanted to ask you too is, with COVID, how have you seen things change, both for one, in a negative way, because I think mental health has really shown itself when
Yeah.
COVID happened with everything. But also, I think people are starting to seek help more and actually think about, hey, I might actually need to talk to someone. So, what is your take on that? And especially from the sports side, with people dealing with, oh, our game just got canceled because someone had COVID, like that kind of thing. Overall, how does the COVID-19 pandemic, how has it affected you and your job?
I mean, it's affected it a great deal. I'll try to give a couple examples. So I think from a mental skills and performance standpoint, what a lot of athletes were lacking when they were able to return to play was confidence, right? You had a lot of sophomores in high school or college that are now captains of the team, and they skipped that junior year. And, to be put in a position where they're expected to lead an organization or to lead a team with a gap in experience of just personal development, athletic development, social development, that's been really challenging. There's been a whole lapse in academic, the academic side of things, where they weren't in classrooms and in live sessions with teachers. So they're not learning as well and they're not learning as consistently, and they're learning bad habits, which they're also taking with them to sport. But I think when it comes to the mental health side of COVID, there's multiple things that coincided at the same time. There's a once in 100-year global pandemic where people's experiences with that vary, right? There's some people who are inconvenienced by the pandemic, but there's also a lot of people who lost loved ones. There's a lot of people who got COVID and
Right.
athletically have been struggling to return back to normal. And then in terms of other things that were happening at the same time, with the socio-political landscape and the election that affected a lot of people around the country, and then the rise of social media, there's a direct correlation over the past 15 years of the usage of social media and these platforms and the decline of mental health. And I can talk all day about why that is, and that how great of a challenge we're going to have with student athletes in particular moving forward with that issue.
Mhm.
But I think between the pandemic, social media, not being in school, not being able to see people face to face, and not receive that kind of coaching and teaching and counseling in person, it was a real challenge. And I think
Yeah.
that I kind of backed up into it a little bit from a professional standpoint. I was pretty fortunate to start this company when all of that was happening. But I think the timing and the need for it is so apparent, and you're seeing that with these universities and pro sports teams starting to create funding to make sure that they're taking care of the mental health of their athletes. Because I used to say to athletic directors and at college and, head coaches and pro sports around 2016, 2017, I was saying, if you want to invest in the mental health and performance of your athletes, you will have a competitive advantage against your opponents.
Mhm.
In 2022, if you're not doing that, not only are you not supporting the athlete's needs like your job is intended to, you're being negligent. There's a huge risk factor that comes with not taking care of the mental health of your athletes, given how prone they are to mental health issues and given how resistant they are to receiving help. So at this point, if you're a college athletic department, a pro sports team, and you're not investing time and money and resources into the mental health of your athletes, it's negligent, it's ridiculous, and you're also going to lose a bunch of games that you should win.
Wow, yeah, I mean, that's something people don't think about, and I think that's important to talk a little bit about too. So we kind of connected through. I saw a post and I retweeted it. I can't remember the lady's name, but I believe she struggled with mental health in college sports, and this I'm not sure exactly how it all developed and everything, but that's how we met and that's how I connected with you. I saw your stuff and wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. But are you seeing? I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but are you seeing more athletes start to speak up because of the resources they have, or do you think there's still more room for? I mean, there's always room for improvement, but are you starting to see a little bit more of that?
Absolutely. 'Cause unfortunately, I think the mental health issue is getting worse in this country, but the awareness and the funding and the resources and the stigma are getting better. So, maybe TikTok or Instagram or Twitter is generating anxiety and depression by excessive use, but it's also lowering the stigma and normalizing speaking about mental health and the opportunities that are available to get help. So, me being hired to come work, on a college campus this fall, there's going to be, I would say, maybe over 50% of the student athletes that are going to seek help from me would not have done so, in the same age group 10 years ago.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of progress being made on that front, and that's a great thing. But there's issues in society that we're kind of going the wrong way with that are going to continue to perpetrate the mental health issue that we're dealing with, meaning technology and social media and NIL deals with, college athletes and the pressure that's put on kids. Kids' childhood is just shrinking and shrinking when you have every piece of information known to mankind at 8 years old at the tip of your fingers. I mean, we
Yeah,
have no idea the long-term mental health consequences that this is causing. So it's going to
yeah.
continue to progress, but it's going to also change and morph into something depending on how well we tackle the issue with the resources and the funding and the professionals in the field.
What do you think is the biggest indicator? Even when someone's not speaking up, this is kind of for coaches. So if you're a coach and you have athletes, what is kind of the biggest like, hey, they might be struggling with something, and if they are, as a coach, I'm gonna get a little free tip here. What would you say to coaches for even like middle school level, high school level, college level, even the pros, because pros do deal with it too. What would you say for coaches to maybe step up and say something? Because I feel like a lot of coaches, and I'm starting to coach too. How do we know when people are struggling? Because obviously a lot of people hold it in, but what's the best way to know that a player is struggling, and what do you do about it?
So your job as a coach is to develop the athletes that are on your team as people first and as players and try to win as many games as possible, right? We understand that there's a competitive nature in sports where, especially at a higher level, if you don't win, then your job's on the line, which impacts your family and your livelihood. But all of those goals can be completed by task number one being to build a genuine, authentic relationship with your players. And I speak with coaches on different skills and ways to go about that and coaching the 2022 athlete and how to connect with them, the challenges that are there, that there might not have been decades ago. So once you have an established relationship, the number one thing that I would look for is a behavior change, right? Is this someone who's typically hustles in every drill that hasn't been for the past few days? And is there a way that they responded to coaching that's unlike them? So you need to have the relationship first to notice the behavior change. And then as if there's a negative behavior change that takes place over the course of several days and it's sustained over a certain amount of time, that might be an indicator that there's something more significant going on. I'll give you an example though. I was coaching at the University of Delaware, and there was a player in my position group that wasn't hustling, and I think it's really common for coaches, especially in football, to just lay into that kid, right? And, let's go. This is what we do. You're letting the team down. I really wanted to know why, because I don't think that it helps the player for me to just yell at him, and maybe there's 1 in 10 players where that actually is helpful, but my relationship with that kid is actually what's going to get him to hustle, not me just yelling at him and making an example out of him. So really understanding why your players act the way that they do, why they say the things that they say, and then look for certain behavior changes. And I could be more specific if we're talking about specific diagnoses, because the last module of that coach's education program that I told you about is called Mental Health in Sport. And I go through common diagnoses that high school and college athletes might have, like learning disorders, anxiety, depression, substance use, and alcohol use. And I say what those warning signs are and what that looks like and how long you would need to be noticing that in order to feel like there might be an issue. And then the process of referral. So if you're coaching in a high school, there's a certain process where there's a counseling center, there's 211, there's resources maybe in that town. In college there's a counseling department as well. And I think that giving your players resources for them to seek help on their own. But to answer your first question about whether or not services would be available and people who may not have the resources, if you're in a school, if you're playing athletics at either a high school or a college, they are mandated, required to provide you with mental health resources. And at the pro level, the money and the insurance for the organization that you play for is readily available for that as well. So we're getting better at that with the money and the resources and the funding. But yeah, for coaches who are trying to figure out if their players are struggling, besides just the generic have a great relationship with them and be able to talk to them about things on and off the field, which requires effort and showing them that you care and following up on those conversations that you have. It's really a behavior change that I look for that takes place over maybe a little bit more than a few days.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So I also wanted to ask you a little bit about your plans for the future. I'm someone who doesn't want to be looking too much into the future, but it's always in the back of your mind. So when you look 5, 10 years down the road, where do you want you to be? Where do you want your company organization to be? And where do you want athletes in the mental health state to be down the road?
Yeah, so I think starting just with the athletes and where I want mental health with athletics to be seen as is I want working on your mental health and performance to be seen as the exact same thing as going to the weight room, right? People who are weak go to the weight room to get stronger. People who are injured go to the weight room to get better. People who are strong go to the weight room to either maintain or get even stronger. So it goes back to that you don't need to be sick to get better. I want people to see working on their mental health and performance as a necessary component to being the best player in person overall they can be. And I want every organization, team, sport in the country to adhere or to bring in mental health and performance similar to they have the strength and conditioning and the nutrition and other aspects that they provide for their student athletes. And then for myself, I want to meet players and coaches where they're at. So I want really easy accessible services like more online programming, like online workshops where you can go to holisticathlete.com and search confidence, and there could be 8 to 10 tutorials or workshops or quick snippets. I call them one pages, where you open the page and it presents a problem and it gives you 3 different solutions to it, and you send me an email and you let me know how those go. So it's quick consulting, it's online products, it's online courses and workshops and education. But I still think that the best services are done in person. So I would like to have those kind of automated online products just be operating in the background and be accessible and available to players and coaches. And then I want to work as a consultant where I can come in and try to make the best impact that I can with organizations and with teams. And this is also true in the business world, right? We could talk about sales, we could talk about HR and onboarding. There's no ceiling to who could benefit from improving their mental skills and improving their mental health. So I want to be able to work with as many people as possible. It goes back to that original reason I stopped coaching, to make as much of an impact on the lives of other people as I can and as many people as I can. And we're just going to have to see how the mental health landscape shapes out in order to figure out what the best way to do that is. But right now, I want to do the in-person services as well as having the automated workshops and courses and things like that be available online.
No doubt. So the last thing that I'll kind of talk about and touch on is obviously you have a website, so I'll link that down below. So you have a blog and some videos. What else do you have available? And I wanted to ask you this too because I'd assume some of your stuff costs money, and there's a lot of, you talked about the insurance part of things, but I think that's a big factor too. Is some people say to themselves, "Well, I don't have money to go somewhere and help myself or things like that." So, what resources do you have, and also how can people share your platform in order to help your message get out in the world and have us conquer, I guess you could say, conquer mental health?
So the to answer your first question, the services that I have is if you're a youth athlete looking to be introduced to mental skills and mental health, I have a book called My Mental Playbook that can be purchased as an ebook at mymentalplaybook.com for $9.99. And if you email me and you want, to have that book for your entire team or organization, we always figure out a deal. We want this information as in as many hands of youth athletes as possible to start that movement of a generation kind of coming up in athletics where they understand that mental health and performance is important and they're already working on it. As we get older, Holistic Athlete does do the one-on-one sessions with works, which is beginning to work with insurance companies. So if you have health insurance, rather than paying out of pocket like in the past, it could be covered as an out of network expense or possibly an in network expense, depending on your insurance company. And then I go speak. I have an online coaches education course, as I told you about, because I think kind of starting from the top and letting coaches impact their players is the best way to get this information and skills in the hands of as many players as possible very quickly. So there's a lot of online services. There's a lot of online courses that I see that are $1,000 or $700, $600. This one is $297. And if I ever speak at a clinic or a workshop or a conference, I just offer a 50-60% promo code. Again, it's more about getting this information in the hands of people who could really benefit from it and use it. So I try to make things as accessible as possible. I know that sports as a field doesn't have as much money as other fields might, and I want to meet people where they're at and make it easy. And I don't want to punish people for wanting to improve their mental health and performance. In terms of me personally and working with me, I have TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. It's all the same handle. It's at Zack Etter 16, and I have a link tree where you could sign up for a free consultation on my calendar. So I want to talk with you. I want to help. I want to kind of assess the issue and provide some potential solutions and see where it goes.
Awesome. Well, I like to leave every episode with one big message. I know we've talked about a lot of different things, but is there one thing that you would like to tell my viewers? It's not a huge crowd that we have, but I do have people tune in and want to learn about sports and learning and growing. That was my first ever motto of this podcast was learn, grow, and get to know sports. But I also think learn, grow, and get to know yourself through sports is very important. So,
Yeah.
what is your one message?
My one message, which we haven't really talked about, is a lot of athletes, especially when they're starting out and since COVID and with the challenges that they have in their lives, a lot of athletes get kind of concerned when they don't feel motivated. And I want to make sure that people understand that motivation is not necessary to get things done. Motivation is not necessary to accomplish your goals. It would be great. So identifying aspects of your day-to-day life that you could build in things that help yourself mentally, physically, academically, athletically, socially, personally, making sure that you're taking care of the holistic person. And then the last thing is if you're not motivated and you're struggling with discipline, the safety net is accountability. Find people in your life to hold you accountable. And, we can make sure that if we're either motivated or disciplined or accountable, that's how we get things done.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Zach. I know we talked about a lot of stuff. And like I said, I'm going to link everything down below because I think you have some great resources for people. And, everybody, if you're listening, feel free to reach out to Zach. I'll link that calendar too for the free consultation. But so many great resources out there. I've been seeing it more and more about mental health, and I wanted to get the word out about it because, as an athlete myself, I never even thought about, I definitely struggled with it. I definitely had it, but it was more of a thing where I kind of just threw it to the gutter because I didn't have all these resources. But that's why I'm super excited to share this because I want people to use the resources like you and like the people around us to be better people. So thanks again, Zach. And for the people listening, thank you so much. Feel free to reach out to Zach for any questions, comments, or concerns.
All right. Thank you guys.